I really can't, the fact that I ended up buckless again, I can't say that I didn't see any bucks because I had a lot of encounters. The ground hunt was another situation where I actually learned about an area based on the success that Dan had in previous years, because this is a spot that him and I had hunted before, but based on the change of the topography, so we had ash trees that were dying, we had changes in food sources, and we knew that this particular area was probably a cluster for bedding. Again, I'll say the advantage of going out to this little remote island that's in the middle of dogwood and cattails, it was super windy that day again. So I know usually we always put stands on our back and we go in that way. I had hunted this area one other time and I didn't scan the whole entire island. I had difficulty finding a good place to set up because it was so thick with cover. So I chose to go in with the mindset that I was going to set up on the ground. So this time I followed the transition trail in that I normally do. I accessed on what would have been the north tip of the island. With the wind in my favor, the wind was a southwest wind that day, so it was kind of cutting across the island like this as I entered it. I got into it. There was a lot of sign around the perimeter where Dan had action, and either the previous year or the year before, you had action with that decent 8. So I got in and I set up on the ground. I tucked myself in. The one thing about setting up on the ground, I made a little makeshift ghillie suit where I basically had a leafy camo on, completely covered up my face. I tucked myself into a patch of buckthorn and like willow bush. So I had all kinds of tangles of trees coming around me, and I just tucked myself in down on the ground. The first buck that came through was a smaller forkhorn, like 4-point buck. It was interesting because the foliage cover on that island was so tall because we're getting this overgrowth of buckthorn, and that buck came out of bedding in the dogwood. He entered the island not 25 yards from me, but it was a smaller buck. I could barely see him. Like, he had no idea I was there, but he literally walked right past me at 25 yards and then came off the island and went towards the crop fields, which are like a quarter mile away. So in this scenario, kind of the theory held true. They were bedding in the middle of this dogwood that was in the center of cattails. They were traversing across a couple of these little islands, and they were moving towards where the crop fields were that held corn. That was the primary direction. So I don't know exactly what time it was, if I have it in my journal here, but before dark, right in that good time, I catch a little movement and hear something coming. And this decent 8-pointer enters the island. Now this time, there's a trail where I was sitting that actually curved like literally right in front of me at 10 yards. And this 8-pointer came in, and I got really good footage of him. He walked on a rope straight to me, and he stood in front of me, and he was looking at me broadside for probably, I don't know, 2 minutes.
I remember seeing that.
Didn't get spooked. I mean, I could have put an arrow through him broadside. He was a decent little 8-pointer, but I chose to pass on him. And the interesting thing about that, the whole time, I mean, even though I was set up on the ground, the wind was to my advantage the entire time. Now, I almost think in that situation, if I would have been skylighted up in a tree, because there's a lot of dead ashes on that island, I might have been picked off easier than the situation that I was in, because I was kind of tucked in. The way that I tucked in, I was in like one of those little holes. You know how you walk into some of those islands and you see those buckthorn corridors, and when you get in there, it's like a dark little cave. That's how I set up, and I think that buck, he came out, he wasn't expecting a human to be in there. He wasn't expecting anything to be in there. I was just kind of a foreign object. And he walked right through. I actually got away with a little because I actually moved my arm to adjust the camera, and he stood right in front of me. But it was a cool hunt. He came through, walked right by, and again followed that pattern and went to the north to go to those crop fields. So again, the cool part about that, my thought process on setting up, is I could see right where that main access trail was, where my theory was that they were coming from bedding. So if it would have been a buck of my liking, the moment he stepped onto that island with his head down, he would have been getting an arrow in him. You know, he was that close. I mean, he was in shooting range right now. So yeah, that was a fun hunt. All right, so I guess that takes us into the kind of the middle of October then. What's going on for you guys in the middle of October?
Well,
Or anything, I mean, is there anything else?
I was hopping around to spots where I knew of good rut bedding, where years past been great, and all of them were bad. I mean, I had very little action. I mean, I had a lot of mediocre bucks I seen that were, probably like the ones you saw, that were okay.
Yeah.
A couple bigger ones that were like tempting or book, but smaller book animals, and I just didn't want to pursue that. I wanted to go after something, you know, relatively bigger, and I just kept moving and moving and moving, and I really didn't get onto a lot. How about you?
For me, I went into it knowing that I could darn well eat my tag, and that buck that I talked about, I just played the game with him, chased him around in that one swamp, and once, I mean, he's an older deer, and once they know they're being hunted,
Yeah.
they hear a person creeping in on them, they just sit tight. He was, I mean, he was in there. I knew he was in there. I would catch, I get pictures of him out in the crop fields around the swamps and stuff, but I just played the game. Now, lesson learned from that, I will probably never do that again. I'm going to have more mature bucks in my arsenal that when I am done beating my head over the wall at that deer, I can go on to the next thing. That was probably my biggest mistake. I hunted, my family's got a little private land, I hunted some of that, passed up on some 120 class animals out there that I probably normally would have shot, but for me it's got to the point where, you know, I shoot a good one like that in Minnesota, and the year before I shot a pretty nice one. You start to appreciate those big deer, and you get to the point where you're okay with eating a tag over it. And
Right, you had already had a pretty good season.
yeah, so I was okay with eating a tag for that reason. Yeah, nothing real exciting. Learned a lot.
I guess on one of my hunts that wasn't successful, I did. I had a thick area that's right beside me, and I'm on kind of an open area where there's bedding in front of me, and there was good sign. I mean, there was a good trail coming past me with big tracks on it. There was some big rubs and stuff, but nothing materialized. Nothing looked really fresh. There's a thicket to my right that sometimes big bucks tuck up against and use it as escape, and that's where Ratslayer's big 160s buck died, you know, that we shot. I could hear a buck in there I could hear his antlers on the trees, you know, but didn't sound real huge to me. And the way he went through that stuff with how thick it is, I think his rack would really be catching if it was a giant buck. And Mario had given me a call and said he was hunting this other public. And that, you want to go on from there?
Yeah, so that was, Rob and I decided to go out one day and we wanted to do a bunch of scouting in another public area. So we met up in the morning, and it was kind of interesting because typical when you go into a public area and you run into some locals that hunted. So we actually ran into
the dog walkers.
Yeah.
That
We
told
ran
us how
into-
to hunt it.
Yeah, totally. And so it was all cool. Like we ran into a local guy and his wife, and they were out walking their pheasant dogs. And he's like, "Oh, you guys going out and deer hunting in there?" He's like, "Well, I live right across over here." And he goes, "My neighbor, he's got deer that come into the yard all the time." So he's literally pointing out to where the CRP field is, and then there's a bean field right next to it on this public.
Next to the parking lot?
Yeah, next to
Yeah.
the parking lot. And he goes, "If I was going to set up, I would set up right in that pine tree over there. You know, all the
The
deer just
lone
walk
pine tree.
walk straight through there." And what ironically about that, you know, we listed was great, is that there's actually, because when we walked out and started scouting, there were quite a number of beds that were in the CRP that was next to the bean field, but you know, I'm thinking from the perspective of, okay, what's the reality that there's going to be a mature buck bedded in that CRP that I'm going to be able to get around by sight and wind, set up in this pine tree and actually get action on. I'm like, it's nearly impossible. You know, the moment I step into the bean field from the parking lot, the thing is going to see me and take off. You know, so there was some other guys that were hunting squirrels, so they were real cautious. Like, "Are you guys going on?" We're like, "We're just scouting." You know, I was like, "Well, we'll stay out of the area if you're gonna hunt." I'm like, "No, just go walk wherever you want. We'll find." So Rob and I spent a good 2 hours. We walked that entire property. And another thing about speed scouting, it's a big piece of property. What is it? I don't know, 200-300 acres. It's big enough, but
The total property is 450 acres.
If
Yeah.
you know how to read it, you can go right through it.
Well, that's just it. Like Mario with your guys' tactics, it's like this is all we need to focus on. There's this small strip along the shore. It brought it up to
Transition.
a lake and a river, and it's like we're just gonna walk this and we're gonna see what we find.
yeah.
And we found good sign.
We also
We
found
also
more
found,
of one
like-
type of sign than deer sign.
Yes.
Lots of human sign, right?
Hang on stands. We found Tinks bottles in October. You know, everything. Boot tracks, everything. You know,
Yeah.
we scouted the whole thing, and we're like,
So it was getting
Yeah.
around, I don't know, at that point it was like probably almost 12:30, 1 o'clock.
12:30 or 1. Yeah.
So I called Dan and said, "Hey, we're thinking about still going," because we went out without our stands, we scouted, and then we're thinking about finding a spot and setting up. Then we came back to the truck and we're like, "Well, you know, what do we do?" And Dan's like, "Well, hey, I had been hunting this other spot, public spot, earlier in the week, and I knew there was a buck into this spot. I heard antlers, you know, rattling on some branches and stuff. Why don't you guys drive down?" And I'm like, "Well, I know that spot. I've hunted it before with Dan. I know a couple of the areas." I said, "Yeah, we could drive down and legitimately get set up in plenty of time."
Because we still have plenty of daylight left.
Yeah.
And we passed Dan along
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
town.
Yeah, because I was going hunting where they were.
Dan was going up to another spot by us, and we were going down by where Dan lives. And
Yeah.
so, we literally passed each other on the road.
And one thing that's interesting here is how far did you have to drive to get to this next spot?
How far?
It's 45
minutes.
minute drive,
Yeah,
right?
but that's another point, is you gotta just
Yes.
go out and do it.
And-
And everybody
and-
wants to just sit in their little core area.
Admittedly, Mario, like, not a lot of convincing, but like a little bit, like, hey, we both don't think this area is gonna be good. Dan's got this other spot, like, let's just drive down to XYZ. Like, no, that's kind of a drive, and he's like, no, let's just do it. So I hopped in the truck with Mario and we drove down, and Mario will go on with the story, but we did it, and it was like, I was contemplating, like, it's a little bit of a drive. I don't want to drive out there.
The other factor too is while we were there, so we were, we got there early. I mean, while I was there in the morning, I got there before Rob, I was waiting in the parking lot looking over some maps and stuff. Not only did the hikers and stuff come out of there, and this is typical public, but there was 3 hunters that came in and out of the woods and were doing their, coming out of their morning hunts. Guy with a climber on his back and a crossbow.
My buddy actually, I didn't know this was the spot he was hunting. My buddy, who's a Beast member, was hunting there 2 nights previous, and I didn't know this is where he was hunting, but he's sending me texts while he's sitting on the evening sit. He's like, dude, I've been set up for like an hour. He's like, 3 dudes just came up and set up right next to me. And there's an area of that's hill country, and he's like, right before you get to like the swamp and everything. And turns out that's right where he was,
And we said that when I walked through and we scouted it, I said, well, okay, so here's your typical hill country, and there's actually the military crest, there's a nice ridge line that runs through it. I said, but at the time of the year that was, I'm like, I would set up here, but I would do it in like the rut when they were cruising. That would be, the one time I would set up in there. But now this isn't. I'm looking for those points or that predominant trail that's coming out of that swamp bedding. I mean, that's what I was really keying in on that transition. So yeah. Anyways, we packed everything up. We drove down, and here's the other interesting spot. So there's a public spot that's in a more heavily populated area, people-wise. So there's a lot of people in close proximity, and it gets hit pretty hard. We go out to this other area. It's in a more rural area in the country. I would have bet that there would have been, because we were getting in late. We were getting in at
2:30, 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. I would have bet there would have been vehicles in the parking lot.
We were the only ones there.
We were the only ones there.
Until Dan came up to help us drag out the deer.
How big is that piece of property, that piece of public? I mean, it's a sizable.
Couple hundred.
Yeah, it's a sizable enough piece. The way that it lays out, that you could hunt it and get in some areas where you're not going to be disturbed by other hunters.
200-300 acres.
Yeah, and there was no one else there, so I just chuckled. I'm like, all right, this is going to work. So I knew the spot that Dan was talking about, which basically, again, when you're talking about hunting a transition in points, this area has there's a huge hill or a kind of a rise that's in the middle of the property, but then it dips down into a swamp area. And the swamp area has one section where it's particularly thick as it transitions from the wooded area to the swamp. And that very thick area then also has a point that juts out probably 30 yards into the swamp. Now Dan, I didn't know exactly where he wanted us to set up, but in hindsight, he had his particular setup more in line with where that point was. We actually went a little bit further down and set up further what ends up being north on the property. Again, I'll say the other advantage that we had in accessing that, it was windy as all get out.
It's terrible.
Yeah, there was
because my tree was going like this, and I was freaking out, holding on to my seat of my stand, because I'm like a little bit scared up in the tree stand.
Bob Schoner and I are set up on a little stretch of public land. We've got bedding off to our south. There's a little peninsula of red brush and trees that juts out into the swamp. And we got in here a little bit late. There's a strong southwest wind that's blowing in like 14 miles an hour. Rob and I are set up side by side here. Hopefully this wind dies out. And get some more action.
Rob is pretty excited. This is his first beast-style hunt. So we're going in there. I'm like, this is going to be all good. The bedding is right off this point. I go, it's super windy. We can get down in here, and even if we're making a little bit of noise getting set up because you're for time, and so we got set up. I'm like, I did the honor and got Rob's stick set up. I'm like, I don't want you blowing out of the tree the first time that you do it. So why don't you tell him what happened while we were setting up?
So Mario did act as, essentially, if you've done an African hunt, Mario was like my porter. So he set up my sticks, and then he set up his sticks, and then he took up my stand and set up my stand, because admittedly, this was my first beast-style hunt. And why blow such a nice spot that Dan gave us with me potentially making noise and stuff? Joe talks about, the few times I talk about Joe with us, and Mario and Dan too, like noise is crucial. So Mario set up my stand, so I get my butt up the stand, and Mario brings his stand up. He gets his stand set up. So basically, Mario and I are up in the stands, and the only thing left on the ground are our bows. And we're getting ready to both start towing up our bows, and out pops this 6-pointer. And this is like maybe just like a little bit after 4 o'clock, so we still had a pretty good amount of light left, and out pops this little 6-pointer from the bedding area that Dan and Mario knew where these bucks would be sitting.
While we were setting up, a little 4-pointer came out of the bedding. And he looked around us, but he didn't have any idea what we were. It's a good sign to see that 4-pointer early. It means we're definitely in the right spot.
And so I look over at Mario and I'm mouthing like, God, I wish I had my goddamn bow with me right now because I could kill this deer. And Mario's like, all right, and he's calming me down. So we basically just hug the trees and stay stagnant for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes till this buck works his way up that plateau, that ridge line that Mario was talking about. And then it's like, okay, he's out of the area. All right, let's start our hunt. So we get our bows up and everything. And maybe 40, 45 minutes walk by, and like Mario said, the wind was blowing so hard in our face. It was kind of blowing into our face and then up the top of the ridge line. So I don't know, Mario made a prediction of what might have happened, but basically thinking that our scent got caught and carried up the ridge line and forced that buck that we saw initially that walked up the ridge line to pop back down onto his trail towards his bedding area.
He's going to run back to his bedding area for safety.
Running back to his bedding area for safety. That's what Mario was thinking. That makes perfect sense. All of a sudden, like I said, about 45 minutes later, Mario's sitting to my right, to the north, and all of a sudden he pops right back out of the brush, walking right back along the same trail towards his bedding area that we first saw him on. So Mario being awesome and is like, yeah, Rob's got to get his first bow buck. He's got to get his first beast kill. So I'm the one doing the shooting. We're at such an extreme angle because we were pretty high up in the tree. Mario had us use 5 beast sticks, which got us pretty far up there. My big butt is swinging left and right with the wind and everything like that. I actually couldn't seated get a shot on the deer, so I had to wait for him to walk past me enough to get an angle on the shot. But finally he did, because he was only within 8 or 10 yards of our trees, because we were set up that close to his trail, that close to the bedding area, which Dan's talked about, numerous times, just getting that close.
Smoke him.
He dropped right here, a little bit over there from where we were sitting, just up there.
So this is extra special for Rob. I had the opportunity to hunt with him today. This is Rob's first bull buck, first public land buck. First beast style hunt buck. A lot of
Yep.
firsts.
A lot of
This is a
firsts
fun
today.
hunt.
We were there. He finally clears it, and I was able to get a shot on him. And I hit him in the spine, and he dropped right away. But this is another thing is that you didn't see on the video that Dan would have posted earlier is that it actually took me about 2 to 3 minutes to actually reach around. I was nervous. I was shaking, admittedly, to get my quiver, get another arrow out of the quiver, to put the second arrow in and to drop it. So when these guys, when Dan and Mario and Joe all talk about, having that second arrow ready, especially in those situations where you get those spine shots, getting one of them. I lucked out because he didn't go that far, but I know I've heard some stories where, deer can jump up or get away or crawl away on you. I lucked out that didn't happen with me, and I was given that 2 to 3 minute time window to do that, but Mario right away, I mean, as soon as he knew I spined the buck, it was like, you got to get another arrow in him. So we finally got that other arrow in him, and that was the hunt, and it was very special for me. It was my first bow buck. It was my first beast style hunt. I was shaking most of the time, and I didn't even do my own setup or anything like that, but it got me hooked, and I spent the rest of the season chasing does, which I didn't have success on, but chasing does in Wisconsin, trying to replicate the same thing because it was that special. And it just goes to show you, learning that terrain, and like with Dan, like Dan's like, I was here, I know there's a buck in here, you guys go set up here. I mean, it was something magical. It was like here, and like we go and we set up there with Mario and Dan, and like there's the buck. I mean, it was truly an amazing experience for me.
What was interesting to me about that too, because I know how the backside, the north side of that property lays out, because we walked it before, and the way that buck traveled, the corridor he came out of first off, because there's an apple tree that's there, because there's that old like apple orchard that's in there, and it was funny when I was putting up the stands and I was eyeing into that area, which is about 50 yards in, I'm like, there's where that trail is coming out of that bedding area.
He did. Mario was looking up at me. He's like, "What?" He's like, "You're right-handed, right?" So Mario was like actually like mimicking, like shooting
And
right-handed.
sure enough,
into that.
for whatever reason, he decided to come out, and I think because it was so windy, that was a huge advantage to us.
Yep.
Because he didn't have a clue that we were there. He was disturbed. Something was odd because we were up in the trees, but he just didn't know we were there.
Mhm.
There was too much other stimulation going on with the wind. And then I think the looping around that predominant trail that ran the transition. So the thick part in the swamp, that buckthorn transition, there was a predominant trail there, and that's exactly what he looped back in on his back trail to come back through and walked right underneath us. And we know that around that corner back in there is where the bedding was, or that big non-typical was back there a few years ago. But it was a cool hunt, and the best part about it is that John showed up, Dan showed up, and they drugged the deer out. I didn't have to drag it up.
No one moves quicker in the woods than Dan. And
The greatest part was that was your first bull buck, right?
It was my
I mean,
first
that's something
bull
you'll
buck.
never forget.
I won't forget it. I admittedly not from like a ego stake, but like just from the nostalgia sake of rewatching it. Like I watched the footage because that was just such a memorable moment for my life.
For me, when I go and I look at my my deer heads on the wall, and this might sound bad, but there's bucks up there, and I'm thinking, man, when did I shoot that? I got to think about it, and I got to think, oh yeah, that's when I got that buck. But I'll tell you what, I'll never forget that first buck I shot, that first little 7-pointer that I shot with my bow, the first one I got. Or the first button buck I got with a gun. I mean, those are your, special memories. No matter what anybody says or anything about size or anything, that beginning of a hunter is really the most special time in your hunting career.
Well, I'll say that about you and Mario, and then Joe, even after we had the chance to talk, at the scouting workshop, like, you guys have all killed, like, amazing big bucks. And you were all like, that's a great buck, like, good job, like, that's awesome, I want to hear about your hunt. Like, that to me was super cool to experience because, you guys have all had such amazing success with harvesting and killing these big bucks, and like I got this little 6-pointer, and it was really special to me. I mean, I was super excited, and like, you know, we did venison tartare for Christmas with them, and like I'm huge into the butchering thing, so like that was big for me. But like, and I got his little European mount like down by my gun safe now, because that's what I did with them. And like the fact that you guys like had that attitude towards it, I think is really unique and different compared to what a lot of people have towards like hunting these days. Because it's all like some friends of mine just like, oh, you got a little 6-point, okay.
Yeah,
good
but
job.
you know what?
Yeah, I think
You
that's
know,
really special.
You got to
have
look
that
at it from a
attitude.
personal standpoint, because it's not apples to apples. There's a lot of guys that bow hunt in public land for 20 years and never get a deer.
Yeah,
You know, you got a guy who's hunting on some private managed farm with preset stands over food plots telling you your deer's small.
yeah,
Screw him.
yeah.
You know.
Well, and that's
It's true. It's
well,
true.
but that's honestly some of the reactions I got. So that's why it was so cool that you guys and anyone else I've encountered has been, you know, in the beast community has been so different with that, because it was really personal to me, and it was really like a sense of personal accomplishment, you know.
Yeah,
and
I
I'm really
think all of us
fortunate
put-
for all of you to
You know, we have I think we have a tendency to put undue pressure on ourselves because we think we have to live up to the expectations of X, Y, or Z, or some other person or something, but the reality of it is,
Somebody who picks on you for the size of the deer is insecure.
yeah, you
Because
really just-
anybody who's gotten to where I am started out where you're at.
yeah.
Me, Mario, Joe,
Yep.
all of
Yeah.
us.
Yep. So yeah, I do want to say again, thank you to Mario, Dan, you know, for making that experience happen, and it's been awesome. And now I'm looking forward to like my goal now is to be able to do, if I could do that next year, that same type of deer, but if I could do it on my own totally, like pick a public spot, you know, find a public spot, scout a public spot, and have that success, that's gonna be a success for me, you know.
It's just a matter of effort and
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
You put your mind to it, you get it done.
And I have learned that from the scouting workshops this year, so which is why I got to get my butt out before the snow melts too much on us. So, but yeah, it was a great hunt, and it was memorable, and it was fun, and like I said, you know, these guys talk about it a lot, but definitely like, you know, yeah, having that arrow ready, just everything with your preparedness is like all those little small details culminate into that perfection, and you know, whether it's how you put your sticks up, what your gear's like, where your tree is, like, it's just, you guys you make all those small things perfect to wind up with your success, and that's a big thing I learned this year hunting, trying to hunt this style.
So another topic I kind of want to touch on, I mean, this year, if I look back, I added 4 more properties to my palette that I never hunted before. Partly because these properties where you get into this complacency because you have success, and then the sign dries up and you're not seeing what you normally see,
Yep.
forces you to move on to other areas.
And that was happening to both of us. You know?
Right. I think the one big reminder, you know, of this is you can put yourself in a pretty good advantage spot if you have the time to get out and just put in the work in the springtime and scout a bunch of different properties. You know, that I recognize that kind of in droves now. It's like reading what guys are different guys that are doing on the beast, that are having success, and then you read about the different scouting and the things that they did. You know, it's not just about getting access to that one really good property. It's about building yourself a portfolio of these different properties, or traveling to different areas that you normally wouldn't travel to, because there's going to be bucks at different age classes in those different areas, and you're going to give yourself more opportunity. You know, we've still got a palette. I know 2 years ago we scouted like 5 properties, you know, in central Wisconsin, and we never went out there and hunted. You know, this year we went out to western Wisconsin and we scouted 3 properties out there, ended up hunting that one property. So that's just adding more to the repertoire of what you want to do.
Yeah, and the thing is too, at first people are going to struggle going to different properties and getting stuck into different scenarios outside of their box.
Yeah.
But that's what grows you as a hunter.
Yeah.
You start seeing the similarities, you start seeing the differences, and you start understanding how to set up on the property that's in your box better because of what you learned in this property. And that hopping around and moving around and hunting a lot of different areas is really what makes great hunters.
You mentioned that when we went to Minnesota, you're like, this is how I got good at what I was doing, is completely going to something completely new. And I have to admit too, when we first got there, it's kind of like banging your head up against a tree, because you're expecting to see your deer, you're expecting to get into sign, you're not seeing it, and you kind of, there's like a stage there that you kind of have to power through. You have to be kind of headstrong. You just have to keep pounding through it.
Moment.
Yeah, and you'll get into them. It just takes time, like anything else. And the more you do that, that process speeds up, and you start to figure it out quicker, and you learn how to speed scout. And
Be nice to see what they throw at us this year.
Well, actually,
there's rumors.
I'll say this: like Dan and I were assembling some sticks, waiting for delivery that day that you had to go up to Minnesota, and I was, we were sitting around the warehouse. What else am I going to talk to Dan Infall about? We're going to talk about hunting, and like, oh, so you got your whole swath of maps, and he's like, no, I'm going to get my boots on the ground. I'm going to figure out what we got going on, and and we're going to get on deer, and it's like, because you've done it so much, you know what to look for and everything. Like, I was just like. It's like, wow, that's like really awesome.
Yeah, my attitude when you get into those new places is you got to get some boots on the ground and get moving. You got to get onto something quick and get it done. And a lot of times you're going to get onto something you can fail. So you got to just keep moving. You got to get, we had a week.
You got to identify what you're doing wrong too. You can't fail and be like, oh, that didn't work, move out of there. You got to look at why did it not work, so that you don't replicate that again.
And that's a huge thing with us. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, you jump that buck on the hill. Most people would be like, oh, there's a buck up there.
Right.
And then they just go about their thing. I mean, you're analyzing why. Like I'm analyzing why, like Joe's analyzing why. We want to know what happened, why. There is no big buck bedding on a hill randomly. He's there for a reason. Why was he there?
Yeah.
How can we manipulate that in the future?
And the why side of things sounds so simple, but I started out not asking why. I can't tell you how many times I got one spot where you walk down a trail way back, and I can't tell you how many times walking in and out I could see deer in the gray light off on the side in this grass, and I never asked why, right? We all want to be cocky and arrogant and think we're the man, but you gotta ask why. Too many people don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even going out to western Wisconsin, hunting those areas a couple times, like I put some serious thought into like, okay, how I set up, and I went out there twice, and why I set up the way I did. Because it's funny, went out there twice. The first time we go out there, Dan sees a nice shooter buck. Second time we go out there, it's Dan and Joe. Of course, I'm there with the two killers. They both see.
That's when you fell, right?
They both have encounters. Yeah,
You
that's when I
fell
fell.
down the
like
tree
I
or whatever.
was,
Yeah.
I was stuck in a deadfall, and these guys were at the truck.
He's on the phone with me saying, I think I broke my leg. I'm like, limp to the truck.
Because his phone call to me was like, yeah, these guys are laughing while I'm like falling over the tree right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was a good idea to take the short way down the ravine. I step up onto a deadfall and go slipping.
It must have been that light we saw flicker. We're like, is he up there? I don't know. Light flickers.
I'm very lucky that I didn't break my leg. That was not
A little
funny.
spastic fall down the hill.
Yeah.
Hate to have to quarter you out.
Yeah. Quartered out Mario. Took him out.
Take him back here to Sussex. Yeah.
But maybe you want to talk about that hunt a little bit. What you two were doing the first time we were in there, or you were in there before I was in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking.
The good part about that is we've been in there before and we learned the bedding.
Right.
I mean, that's hill country.
Yeah.
And what we did, me and Mario, is we just, who wants what side? Because it's a valley and each ridge had good points on it that would have bedding on for them wins.
Well, here's what was the most interesting part. So Dan and I, you can look at our journals. We had been hunting pretty hard, and doing the whole boots on the ground. You scout when you hunt. You try to pick up fresh sign. Try to pick up fresh rubs, poop, tracks, whatever. And we've kind of been hitting a lot of dry spells. Like we weren't seeing big fresh sign. So we get into this spot, and the moment that we start accessing from the corridor off the road, we're like, dude, did you see that scrape right there? Look at this track. Look at this rub. We're not even 20 yards into the place.
But look at this track. This is what caught my attention. That's a big track right there. 2 tips right there.
So actually, that was just a fun first.
I knew right there we were gonna run into that buck.
Yeah. And Dan was funny because here's a difference, a little bit of difference in mindset, right? He looks at me and he goes, I was like, this is awesome. We're seeing all this sign. And he's like, well, I'm gonna kill that buck. I know you're excited. he's like, I get excited about seeing all this signs. I'm gonna kill that buck. And I was kind of like, oh no, I guess you're right. Maybe I should get excited about shooting a deer, but.
What do you guys think of the scrape activity out here? Hey, what are we, 50 yards from the truck?
Got another one right up there too.
Yeah, they're one after another. They're all down this trail. There's another one up there. You got the killer mode on?
Yeah.
You better.
Yeah.
You don't seem like you're with it. You should be like,
I'm
you should be like, I'm
focused.
killing.
It's focused right there.
You're focused.
It's focused,
All right.
yeah.
Let's go get them. They're moving. These scrapes have all been done since it rained.
Yeah.
It rained last night.
They should be moving early. That's what we need. We need
Yep.
movement early.
Yeah, they're here. We just gotta get them to move.
There's no human sign, is there?
Yeah, we split up and went on both sides of the way that this property lays out. And it's interesting because I ran into even more sign on the tip. I think my downfall, what I did, because I hadn't hunted that spot yet. I knew it from, we had scouted.
Yeah, we only went
many
through there with you
years
like
ago.
once or twice.
Right. I went in too deep. And I pressured. So the way that hill country is set up is you really have a high crest that runs up in a bowl, and being on the western side of that crest, there's private on that backside. And I think if I would hunt that differently now, what I would have done is the very first hunt, I would have came in on that tip, because I did come across a nice scrape off that tip, and I would have sat that tip, and I think I would have had some action of deer following the backside, the leeward
Yep.
side of that hill. But instead I hopped on that lower elevation trail and I followed it in. And the way that this is set up is that you have these high rock outcroppings on the top where it flattens out as a plateau, and then just below that there's thick portions of deadfall and back cover, and the bedding is all along there. And it was interesting because Dan was like, he's like, hey, I can see you walking along there. He goes, you were walking past where all the bedding was and stuff, But I was following the transition trail, and there were deer. The first sit, deer got up out of bedding on the top of those transitions in the thickest part of those plateaus, which I knew of from scouting. It was like 5 years ago, right? But it was literally at dark. Like they were getting up. I could hear them coming down off that hill, and then it got to the point where it was so dark that I took my stuff down and they were blowing at me. I don't know what they were, if it was doe or if it was a buck, but they definitely got up and came down. The second hunt I went in there, the difference was there was some doe bedded in those downfalls that were lower in the ravine area. I set up further back, but the wind shifted on me, so instead of being on the leeward side and having the wind in my favor where they'd be cruising that trail, the wind was sucking into that saddle that was in there, the wind was sucking into the saddle on the other side, and I actually did hear running on that opposite side, but it's private over there, so that's just the way it turned out for me. But you guys,
So my
different
first hunt,
experience, yeah.
before Joe came, my first hunt, I went up onto the left side, and I went and made my way in a way where I thought I'd have the least amount of damage. I went up this one ridge and got in there, and I wanted to get to the crest of this valley, because there'd been a couple times I ran into a real big buck there, and I sent Joe in after that buck once, and he had a crack at it. Remember that?
Yeah, I'll tell that story too.
So I got up to that point, and I didn't see the sign I wanted to see. There was buck sign there, and good sign, big buck sign, but I wanted to push further. It didn't look good enough, and I went to a spot where a bunch of logging roads converge, and the terrain converges in a way that it forces travel through there, and the bedding surrounds it, and there's good rut travel through there as well. And I got there where you can hit all the logging roads from one spot, and I got into a tree.
There's a logging road comes along here like this. Comes down here, and right here it splits. Half of it goes down around there, goes around that bowl and down. And the other half goes up here and goes up that ridge. There's some unique log jams here that block deer travel through that way. And block it through over here, force it through There's 3 scrapes underneath that tree series over there. And I can remember coming here once before. I've hunted this about 2 or 3 times. I hunted that tree right there. And I got up to where that Y is. And I had my bow sitting on the ground, and I was just setting my stand up. And a big 10-pointer came walking right down underneath me, and there's nothing I could do. Got a wishy-washy wind. Sometimes it's blowing that way, and sometimes it's blowing this way. I don't know, I just get real high and we'll hope for the best. I'm expecting travel to come out of there or this way. Bedding's usually up in there, especially with the predicted wind. Predicted wind is north. I'm getting east and west breezes, and probably because of the bowl here.
And the movement was late. And first buck came through, and it wasn't real big, came by, and then another one started coming out. It was noticeably much bigger than the first buck. And I could see a rack coming, but he just took his time, slow. And by the time he got to where I could shoot, which was underneath me, I could have shot him, but it was too dark. It was too late, and I let him go.
Yeah.
I could have killed him, I'm pretty sure, but I couldn't even count points. So I let him walk, let him go past. He got out of there, and I let him get good and out of there, and then I left. The second hunt, Joe called and he said, well, if you guys are seeing bucks, I wouldn't mind coming.
Imagine that.
But Joe's been up there with us before, and it's always a riot having him along.
The one thing I'll add, I'll interject for a quick second. So this particular spot years ago, you said, hey, why don't you go check it out?
Well, what happened was, if I can interject,
Yeah.
is I was hunting up there with a guy from work.
Okay.
And
Yep.
he's going to love that when he sees this video, because I'm going to say it like it is. It's Scott Slade. He comes up there with me to hunt, and I was going to Iowa, and I was going to stop over there and hunt with him for a day.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the whole weekend. But we go up there, and we get set up, and he was where those logging roads converge. This is a few years
Yeah,
back,
yeah.
probably the time before that I hunted there. And he comes out and he says, this giant buck come out and worked a scrape right on the edge of the drop-off, which is the first place I looked at that I talked about.
Yep.
And he says, there's just a worn out scrape there, and he says, it came off this ridge. I go, that buck's gonna do that again tomorrow. Was he alert? He goes, no, I just kept going. I said, you need to sit there. He goes, can you stay another day? I go, I can't, but you need to go sit there and kill that buck. And he's like, man, I would never be able to find my way back out of there in the dark. I go, you just go downhill, you hit a road. I mean, come on, man up. I don't know, what are the chances that buck will come back through? And I'm like, dude, that buck is gonna come to that scrape tomorrow, and you're gonna kill it. And he's like, I'm gonna go home. If you're going home, I'm going home. I'm like, dude, man up. So I had plans in Iowa to hunt with Andre.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, I gotta go. Just set up there, you'll kill it. I'm going home. Okay. And he even stayed in a hotel overnight and left in the morning to go home. I mean, all he had to do is go out there. He's afraid of the dark and getting out of there alone. Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was mad about it. I'm like, that buck needs to die.
Right.
1-800-JOE. Okay, go ahead.
So then what actually happened, so you were thinking that buck was hanging out in the back, right, where we were this year. And you told me count 1, 2, 3 valleys and go up the third valley, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got in there and I looked, I'm like 1 dip, 2 dip, 3 dip. I'm like, okay, this is where I need to go up. So I actually went up way forward, close to the road, and I didn't know what the hell I was
But that's
doing.
where the buck had come from.
Yep, so that was actually probably about 7 years ago, maybe 5-7 years ago. That was
It was a while ago, yeah.
That was when I didn't know as much of what I was doing, and I just cruised halfway up the ridge. Dan's like 1/3, so I got 1/3 of the way up, and this big tank comes down the ridge, loops back up, and I'm like, oh, that's where the deer are. So I moved up the ridge, and at last light, he looped down, and I could have shot him straight through the chest. There's a pretty neat video. I don't know if you still have it. You could post it up.
Yep.
That's in a Hill Country DVD, but he was a slob. And the funny thing was, when we went hunting there this year, we were walking, and I said, this is where he told me to sit, right? And you're like, no, I told you to go way back there. But that buck was sitting up on top, watching all the people walk down below.
And we talked about that because there's a bunch of sign right there.
Right.
There's that big scrape. There's all those.
Yeah, everybody's
tracks.
headed back, and he's watching.
Yeah.
So
And on a I mean, literally a 60-degree incline. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a steep
Yep.
incline right there.
And that day, what is the day of the month? They say November 8th is the hottest day of the year usually for rut action. I believe it was November 8th, and I saw like 8 1.5-year-old bucks, and those deer at 60-degree incline, they would run straight up it. It was nothing.
That's a
for
great
'em.
area.
It was nothing for them.
So, the next time we went in, the second hunt, we had Joe along. We decided, I'd already hunted that area, but I was gonna probably go back up in that area again and hope that that buck came through. Because I wanted to hunt that one more time, because he didn't know I was there. He just came up the logging road, walked past. I was gonna give it one more shot and hope he came in a little earlier. Because now we had pretty much full rut.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I was gonna take Joe to the back, and there's a spot back there where I've had a lot of action over the years, but hadn't really hunted a lot in recent years. And we got back there, and really, the sign looked like crap, and I really couldn't justify leaving Joe there to hunt that. I wouldn't hunt it. I mean, you didn't like it, right?
No, it was. You could tell it's cold.
So I was like, well, there's another spot that's near me that is really good, and I didn't even know that's pretty much where you hunted before, just a little bit over from up the hill, you know, right?
Yep.
But I'm like, where everything kind of comes together, and I think your biggest concern was cutting me off, or vice
Yeah,
versa. And
I
I'm
would've-
like,
I
no,
would've
we're two ends, and there's doe bedding in between
Yep.
us,
Yep.
you know. But so I set up on one end of the doe bedding where the trails converge, same spot, same tree I was in the time before, just hoping they came through just a little earlier with the rut peaking, you know. And I'm sitting there and nothing's happening. But when we were in the back looking at that dead spot, we looked up and I saw Mario way too far over. That's where I said you're too far over.
Yes.
Yeah. But, and that's the nice thing is our group, we're close enough that I can nitpick what you do, you can nitpick what I do, and we take that as constructive.
Oh, yeah.
Where you do that in some groups, and you get some guy gets real pissy,
Bent
and you
nose,
can't
yeah.
talk to him, and that guy can't learn. He gets beyond learning, right?
Yep.
But anywho,
Then Dan walks home. No.
right? You gotta know how far you can push him.
Not when his legs caught up in a tree.
Right. So, anywho, so now we're sitting pretty close. What were we, like 400 yards apart, maybe?
Yep.
Yeah, just a little ridge. We couldn't see each other because of that little ridge with the doe bed. But I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I look up, and I see this buck coming, and he's got a rat. And he's getting closer and closer, and he's coming the same way that that buck came the week before that I let go because of darkness. But it comes through, and I'm like, when he walks in front of me, he's dead. But then he turns, and doesn't go quite past there. And I think maybe he got a little of my odor over there where I walked across the trail, and he was going to go around that. So he goes around, and I had him 45 yards, and I thought I could make the shot. And I took the shot, and I went underneath him. He takes one jump, looks around, and just keeps walking. Doesn't even know he's been shot at. You know, he heard the noise, and it freaked him for a second, but he just keeps walking. And I get another arrow out and getting it on, and now he's like 5 or 10 yards further, and I'm like, I can't take that shot. I won't make it. So I hung the bow up, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, well, hell, he's headed for Joe. So I sent you a text, and I'm like, hey,
Yep.
dude, one coming.
Yep.
That was a real long shot. I probably shouldn't have took it, but I thought I could make it. I was like this low, below him. Oh man, Joe's hunting right over the hill. I texted Joe, big one coming, because it just was heading straight for him. And after it took one hop, it was just walking straight at him. I tried grunting it back over here, and every time I'd grunt, it would just stop and stare in my direction. But it went over the hill, and then I don't know what's going on. I haven't heard him shoot, but Joe is right in the funnel over the hill. So, it would be just like Joe to kill that thing.
Right after I heard him shoot, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure Dan shot. And a few seconds after that, where I was sitting, it kind of dropped down on both sides, and I could hear something down below, and I thought that was the buck. It was long, bellowing grunts and everything. I don't know if it had a doe or what. And
Yeah, you texted me. He's grunting. I can hear him grunting, and
Yeah.
I'm like,
I
I can
said-
still see him.
I
He's
said-
not grunting.
I texted you. I said, "Are you grunting?" I asked you if you were grunting at him. Yep. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I couldn't
Dan
tell.
was grunting after he missed the shot.
Yeah, I didn't know.
That was the beans.
Yeah. And it took, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes before I finally saw him, and then what he ended up doing, he would have come straight my way, and I could have slammed him. You could see kind of a scrape line that he had been running that I was sitting on. And what happened was the buck that was over the ridge that was making those long bellowing grunts, he must have been with a doe or something, and he dumped down with him. But if I had been forward a little bit, or if that buck had not been down there with the other deer, I could have killed him.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid buck, too. That's a pretty nice buck.
I didn't get a good look at him. He looked a lot like my Minnesota buck, I thought. And then I went back to that spot. I thought I need to at least sit it once, burn the spot at least once. I need to know that that buck's not going to do the same thing 3 nights in a row. So I went back one other time, and it was just burnt out. And I don't know if you've been on top of that ridge at all or not, but the very top of that ridge where the doe bedding was, there are trees this big just shredded all the way up and down there. So he's running that hard. I'd be curious to see if he's alive in there or not. Might be worth a trip this spring. Check it out.
Next year, I'm going to make good on that killing them thing.
Do it. Do it.
At least one of us better.
Yeah. Yeah, you haven't killed anything out there in a while, have you? You used to
No,
kill a lot of stuff.
I used to kill bucks up there every year, and I haven't killed one up there in a while.
Rut, I've got a couple encounters for the rut yet, right?
Well, then you got to go into that.
I guess I gotta go into that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You had some good hunting during the rut.
I
That's
had
right.
some more encounters during the rut.
Well, I sat on the other side of the fence going,
So, one particular hunt, I'm trying to find what date that was. Was that? So there was the area that was deeper in the swamp. So, a couple years ago, we identified a spot that had a cluster of tamaracks. That was a high spot in an area of cattails that was holding a lot of water, mainly due to the last 2 years. And we knew that was probably a really good bedding area. And I'll make this pretty quick because I didn't really get any eyes on a buck, as far as an encounter of seeing an animal. But I did put 4 hunts at that spot during various times during the rut. And what was interesting about that spot is you had to cross, waist deep water in one spot to get to it. But what was interesting, and I think what people learn about mature animals bedding just off of these access trails, is when I entered that area, there's an old access trail that's like a logging road or an old ATV trail that's in this spot. And the tree root system, so there were smaller tamarack pines and ash trees in there, but the elevated root systems had beds that were literally 10 yards off that main access trail. And that main access trail had water in it in some spots. Some spots was deeper water, like thigh deep or waist deep, but that was the corridor where deer could travel. Off of that trail was a thick, nasty tangle of buckthorn, prickly ash that had been overgrown in there, thicker cattails that are so tight that you can't walk through them, but these specific corridors were holding deer. Now, out of the couple times that I had encounters, as I was setting up once during the cruising phase, I had a buck run down from the north and get up just behind me, downwind of me, turn, and bolt back up north. So I never got eyes on him. Another time I sat in there, I actually had all the deer get up out of bedding about 50 yards to my east, but they got up and they traveled again towards, northeast towards where this crop fields and stuff were. So the last time I hunted there, I actually pushed it further in to get access to where, so the bedding is sitting right on these tamaracks, and I literally got in within 50 yards north of where that bedding area is. And again, it started raining. I didn't have any encounter, but what was interesting to me about just seeing the land from that access trail, I could look back into where the bedding was on those tamaracks, and I could actually see branches that were broken and where the bedding clusters were not 15 yards off the trail. So again, what that tells me, probably the second night that I had sat up there and hunted and heard those deer get up and move, I'm pretty confident that they traveled, that buck got up and traveled out of that trail that I was looking at where there was the sign of the broken branches. The problem is that that's like a super hard spot to hunt because you have to get so close to them and it's noisy and there's water.
But like you, I'm confident that's where a lot of the big boys in there are.
Yep, I'm confident too. And they're in that spot because it's difficult to get to them and, you know, they've used it year after year.
A couple of years ago, late season, I had some giants coming out of there.
Yeah, yeah. So fast forward to another rut hunt I had. I mean, this hunt is actually a timing thing. So I knew, like, I dropped my daughter off at the bus at like, it was like 8:10. I knew I had to get out to the spot. Typically with moon phase and stuff, I mean, we see a lot of cruising at like right at like 9 o'clock is a good time to set up. So I get out to the spot. I was focusing on this particular funnel where I had set up earlier and I had doe that actually came and bedded on this point. And some previous hunters that had hunted this area, you know, like to talk or whatever, you know, they had action and seen other deer that were in this area. So I probably in hindsight got a little more aggressive than I should have. There was an option where I could have sat back and watched this corridor, but I decided to push ahead, go on the other side of the corridor and hunt right on the transition of a oak island that had cattails on both sides that we knew were primary bedding. And then that met up against another high ground oak island, and then there was a funnel right in between them, typically what you see. So the deer would run this funnel north and south, or they would run the two transitions lines east and west on each side of that peninsula. So I'm getting set up. I'm actually 4 sticks up. I don't have my stand set up yet. And I hear and I look to my west, and there's what I believe it was a nice 8 or a nice 10. And thinking back, I mean, I really think it was the buck that you ended up shooting. But I look, and here's this giant buck standing and looking right at me. And it was one of those scenarios where I was 4 sticks up just above where the buckthorn and everything is, and he had a perfect clear line of sight to stare and look right at me. If I would have been sitting on the ground, or if I would have just got there and set up, like I could have ducked down and potentially got a shot at him, because the way that this was laid out, he was coming right down to the center of the island. He was accessing that spot because there was doe bedding there previously, and he was walking this, you talk about seeing on a topo map transition trails that come off a point. He was going right for that point, right for that transition trail to cross it. So that was exciting and got us thinking about these 2 bedding areas.
Yeah, but think about, too, what led you there. I mean, last year, we had a lot of encounters along the transition that comes out of there. So we started suspecting that corner. And then you got that big buck 2 years ago that ran back in there and died there. Yeah, that one.
That's a pretty good one, dude. Looks pretty nice.
That one.
That
Yeah.
died right in the beds there.
Right.
You know, so you start putting 2 and 2 together, it's one of those spots that once you find it, it's obvious, but it was an overlooked spot.
It was that spot back there, and based on, you know, the next couple hunts that I had, for whatever reason, those cattails that are on that one side, and I think it's an area where they have protection of a river. They have protection of a sea of cattails that go north and south, and they got that land bridge peninsula that they can run. And on the other side of that land bridge peninsula, there's doe bedding. We know there's predominant doe bedding there that we see every year. And yeah, now it's multiple years in a row that we know a big buck is typically tending a doe in those cattails. And I ended up seeing the same thing. So have that encounter. I stay in that in that setup. Set up later on that day. I have a different buck. I heavy racked what I think was an 8. The weird thing is that the buck actually came through the funnel first, and he was just out of my range at like 45 yards behind this thicket, and there was this little doe like trailing him. Like, so he wasn't, the doe was actually following him, which was kind of odd to me. I didn't actually get that thing on film, which I was probably more upset with the fact that I had that encounter and I didn't get it on film, but he came through the funnel, and again, followed that same transition that 11 pointer died on, He walked that transition and traveled north, which then connects a couple of these other swamps and peninsulas. So I decided again, being mobile, gonna switch it up. I got down, packed up all my stuff, and I shot across the funnel to the furthest possible point that I could hunt, where I could shoot to that spot that buck came out, and I had access to shoot back to the other point where I had the encounter in the morning. So I remember it was like 2:15, and I texted my wife. I was like, "Hey, you gotta send me some mojo here so that big buck comes back." And I swear, no less than like 10 minutes, I catch movement to my north, and I look over, and that mature buck is coming back with that same doe. But instead of following the bowl of the funnel back to me into my shooting lane, he dropped down about 75 yards to my north and cut right across the swamp, the doe chasing him, and he went right back to that bedding at 2:30. Now the only bad part about the story, it's cool the way it plays out because you know that's a primary bedding spot, you know that there's a hub of bucks that are living there, but I can't hunt over there. So I had to watch that buck run over there and know that I couldn't move again. Like if I had access to hunt that, I would have got down, I would have moved right to that transition of where those cattails are, and I would have hunted him, and I know he would have came out with that doe later on that night, or I at least would have had eyes on him.
So the first thing that happened was Joe here farted real bad when I was walking up the trail, and I got so sick I almost had to go back. That was bad, Joe. I don't know what you eat, dead cats or...
Oh wait, that was you that farted real bad.
I don't fart.
I had tried to figure out which way the wind was going to get away from it.
Now, did you guys hear any doe bleeding?
No.
Because I heard a doe bleed in the low, like down low.
Could have been Joe farting.
Yeah.
God, you should smell that guy. Whew! Don't walk behind him.
But
He's the one that fucking reeks.
yeah.